afternoon, and I am so excited to have Dr. Nadine Macaluso here, also known as Dr. Nay. Thank you so much for joining my podcast today. I'm so honored to have you as a guest.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
So you and I, we did a pre-production call last week,
Yes,
and I was
yes.
so excited to talk with you and hear about your book, and which is Run Like Hell. And you sent me a PDF version, and I got to read that, and I was just so inspired by your book and all of those amazing stories that you have in there. And I want to hear from you just a little bit of, your journey to success. Like, tell me about your story. How did you become this powerful woman that you are?
Oh, thank you. You're so sweet. And thank you for taking the time to read my book. I really appreciate that. I grew up in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, with a single mom in the 70s. It was such a fun time to be alive. No internet, right? To be a kid and just
Yeah.
streets all day and use your imagination. And I was raised by a mother who was very into psychology. So from a very young age, she was talking to me about emotions and feelings, and it was a fun time in Brooklyn. And then as time went on, she was a single mom and I needed to make my own money. And so I became a model in New York City in the 80s. And I didn't love modeling, but it sure paid the bills. And I was having so much fun running around New York City. And then one of my boyfriends at the time says, why don't we go to this big party in the Hamptons? So I go to this big party in the Hamptons, and that day changed my life forever because I met my ex-husband, Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, like the scene from the movie that really happened.
Yes. Yes, that really happened. That really happened. So I walked into the party, I met him. They were all acting crazy. I didn't know why. I didn't know they were all on Quaaludes because I didn't even know what a Quaalude was.
Yeah.
And he saw me, and I guess he set his sights on me, and then he pursued me. And we went on our first date, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah. So, was he really married at the time?
He was. He was really married at the time, and so what happened is that he made some woman in the stock market $15,000 to take me out on our first date, but I didn't know it was a date. It was a total setup. And
Oh,
I had no
wow.
idea. Yeah, I had no idea. And then about 6 months later, because I didn't follow up with him, I bumped into him at the gym and he's like, I'm separated. I have an apartment in the city. So, as a 22-year-old girl, I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
you believe them. Now I know better. And so then we started to date, and it was fast and furious, just like a trauma bond. 6 months later, we were engaged. 6 months later, we
Oh,
were married.
wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's super fast.
super
So,
fast.
you mentioned trauma bond, and I know that that is, all throughout your book. And
Yeah,
so, do you want to tell us a little bit about what the trauma bond is? And
sure.
just, yeah.
Sure. So a trauma bond is any toxic dysfunctional relationship between two emotionally attached people. But what makes it different, and it can be between friends, parent and child, and boss and employee, but I write about it between intimate lovers. And what makes it different is that one person wants power and control over their partner.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it has to have two things for it to be a trauma bond, a power imbalance, meaning one person has the power and they abuse that power. And the second thing is intermittent reinforcement, which I write about, where 70% of the time they are cruel, controlling, abusive, often betraying, but 30% of the time they're nice, generous, and helpful. And
Mm-hmm.
that extreme behavior from them creates extreme feelings inside of us, and that's what creates the bond.
Yeah. And so the trauma bond, that's interesting. So it can be between anybody, parent,
Yes,
child. Yeah. So, because obviously, I'm a divorce attorney. So we experience those with clients. It can be with, spouses or parent child. And I know that's something that you and I had talked about. And also just, I was raised by a single mom too. And so we've got so much to unpack and we can get into that. I would love to talk other episodes about that too. Just there's so much that goes into, I think, a woman and this is, I guess, I'd be curious what your opinion is on this. Just, what makes a woman super independent and like be like a strong personality? And for me, I always feel like having that single mom, like
Yeah.
seeing her have those struggles, like just always, like my mom cleaned houses, like, to make extra money, and she was kind of always struggling and had to rely on her parents a lot. And I just, every time she went through a divorce, she kind of got the wool put out from under her. So I never wanted to be in that situation. So I feel like that I love talking to women about that because I think there's something really interesting about that and a common thread between women that you feel. And I got the impression that that influenced you too.
Yes.
Even though, yeah, like even though you were a state, you were a housewife during a certain part of your
Yes.
life. How do you think
Yes.
that impacted you?
Well, my mom, I think you bring up a good point, right? My mom, she worked, she went to school, she raised us, she did it all. And she was super strong and smart and bright. And I always say children do what we do, not what we tell them to do. So I think when we have a strong role model, and my mom, having mothers that are willing to get divorced and do it on their own, right? It embodies for us a very strong, powerful role model. And so she definitely, definitely influenced me in my decision. And yes, when I was with my ex, I didn't work, but I was always that type of person. I went to interior design school. I learned about wine because we were drinking expensive wine. I learned about furniture, right? She really instilled in me this love of learning.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really an important quality.
So during your marriage, with the Wolf of Wall Street, did you have a close relationship with your mom? Was she involved
I
in your?
did. Yes,
Okay.
yes. And in fact, when I told her I was getting married, she took me to lunch and she said, you don't have to do this. And I said, oh, but mom, I love them,
Yeah.
So trying
Did
to
she
talk
feel
me
like,
out of it.
yeah, did she feel like it was moving really fast?
Yeah, and it was. And that's the thing about a trauma bond, a quintessential trauma bond. There's love bombing, right? So there's like so much adoration and admiration, over the top gifts, and you're my soulmate within 2 weeks. And it goes at a very intense, quick pace. And we certainly had that. And I'm sure she was like, what's happening? You don't have to do this.
Yeah.
But I did.
So one thing that my clients talk about, I know you and I talked about this too. So there's narcissist, which my clients talk about all the time. They're always like, "Oh, have you ever dealt with a narcissist? My ex is a narcissist." Oh my gosh. And then, we were talking, that's like, of course, a diagnosed personality disorder, which, you
Yeah.
know, so what do you feel like is the difference between a narcissist and what you're saying is this pathological lover that you've coined in your book?
Well, a narcissist, as we know, is like an entitled person who will exploit people and very self-absorbed and very selfish. And so I think that, yes, pathological people do have traits of narcissism, but I call this person a pathological lover. And that's because pathological means mentally unwell. And so this person will use, harm, exploit, and betray anyone to get their needs met for money, power, pleasure, and status. And I think that anybody who would do that is mentally unwell. But I do mention in my book how they have traits of psychopathy, some of them. They usually are very
Hmm.
impulsive. They can have a compulsive process disorder like sex addiction or gambling. They
Yeah.
can something called Machiavellianism, which makes them highly manipulative and highly strategic, and some even are sadistic. So they have a lot of dark flavors that go into their personality. And I often think that it's much more than narcissism. And of course, it runs on a spectrum, not
Yeah.
everybody, the full-blown pathological lover. But from my personal experience and my experience with my patients, they have a lot of those dark traits.
Do you think that there is a type of woman that's attracted to those type of men, or is anyone susceptible?
I think anyone's susceptible. I think because you're dealing with a con artist, and whether you're very successful, unsuccessful, a stay-at-home mom, trying to make it in the world, it really doesn't matter because when somebody wants to manipulate you and trick you in the name of love, we're wired for connection. We're going to
Yeah.
fall. Now,
Yes.
there are certain women that are more perfect prey, and I talk about the personality traits, right, in my book. And when I work with my patients, I teach them about their personality traits, and there are two: agreeableness and conscientiousness that I have that make me more prone to become prey for these people.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to educate women about that. But there are women that had developmental trauma and it's a reenactment. There are women that are more
Yeah.
dependent, So I just think the
Yeah.
most important thing is to understand your own personality traits to get to understand yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you think that are there any marriages that can succeed when you're married to someone like that? Like, is there a way to, do you ever counsel couples that, um, the husband is that, but they
Yeah.
make it work, or and he can get healthier?
Yeah, a lot of people, a lot of my colleagues don't think that these people can change. And I would say most of the time they can't change, but I have seen a few change.
Yeah.
So experience is the greatest teacher. But what I've seen is that the person has to really want to change.
Mm-hmm.
Person
Yeah.
who's pathological, A, has to take accountability that they are who they are, right? Because you can't change something you don't admit. And then really, really want to change. A lot of times it's stopping using the substance that they're using, which is the beginning step. And then, yeah, I have seen people change, but it is much more challenging. It doesn't happen that often.
Yeah. So when did you know that you were in that type of relationship with the Wolf on Wall Street? When did you know it was unhealthy?
I knew right away something, like I would say 6 months in, something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was, right? Because nobody was talking about
Mm-hmm.
narcissism and trauma bonds and all this sort of stuff back then. But I knew it because he became very dominating and threatening and intimidating. And I just was like, I don't think you need to be so controlling. I love you. You
Uh-huh.
but it didn't matter to him. He got very controlling over like when we were getting married, when we were having children, and my sense of autonomy. And so that really, back then, I didn't know it was a red flag, but my gut was
Yeah.
like, there's something wrong here.
Mm-hmm. Did he try to control you working outside of the home or anything like that?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I was modeling at the time, and he was like, oh, you don't need to do that.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't, that money means nothing. And so I was like, oh, okay, right. But then when you lose that financial independence, that's a
Yeah.
big deal because then you're really dependent upon that person.
Mm-hmm. So how quickly after you guys got married did y'all have children?
Well, I was pregnant at my wedding and I had a miscarriage, and then I had another miscarriage. And so I think I got married at 23 and had my first child, my daughter, at 25.
Okay. You were 23.
I was 23 when we got married and 25 when I had my first
Oh, wow.
child.
Yeah, you were really young. How old is he older than you? How old is
No,
he?
I was 23, he was 28. Really
Okay.
not that much of a difference, no.
Okay. Yeah. So, and he's since remarried, correct?
Yes, yes, to a lovely young woman, yes.
Okay. Do you think he still has those same character traits with her, or do you?
I mean, I don't really know because I haven't lived with him for so
Yeah.
long. I hope not. I
But does
hope not.
she has she ever confided in you with anything about
No,
that?
no,
Okay.
no,
I was
no.
curious, you know how sometimes the new wife will be like talking to
Yeah,
the
no.
ex-wife, yeah. So, and then and you're remarried as
Yes,
well.
yes.
So, what was that journey like? Because I know you post a lot about, healthy relationship and so
Yeah.
what was that journey like for you?
Well, the journey was, I mean, first of all, when you left a trauma bond, it's very hard to trust again. It just is because you just feel so betrayed and heartbroken. But I went to a place called the Karen Foundation in Pennsylvania for a week. They have a program there called Breakthrough. And so, aside from my therapy, I learned a lot about myself. I learned I could say no. I didn't know I could say no. I didn't know what boundaries were. Because, again, you have to remember this was so long ago. And so, what happened is I really learned to start to trust myself. And
Mm-hmm.
my current husband. We're together 25 years now. And the first time we have an argument, he's like, oh, yeah, I hear that. And I was like, what? You can hear me? You can have empathy? You can look at things from my perspective? And so there were these green flags, right, that started to
Yeah.
happen that I started to notice that kept saying, go, 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 right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
did
not
you
that,
have,
our marriage has been perfect,
oh
but
yeah. Well, nobody's is. That's what I tell clients too. I'm like, look, I'm married too. So, yeah, it's nobody, everybody's got their,
everybody's, but we've been able to work through
yeah.
everything.
Yeah. And so do you feel like, um, so was there anything that, well, I guess, oh, I did want, what was the catalyst for you ending the relationship?
So the catalyst was his drug addiction was so rampant and he wouldn't stop it. And I had two little babies, and I just
Yeah.
was like, I'm not going to sit here and watch you kill yourself while all these people that you make tons of money for, they're willing to do it. And once I told him that, he got furious with me and very angry and threw all my clothing and jewelry into the fireplace and lit them on fire. And then you see that one guy in the movie. And
Yes.
and so the good news was after that big drama, he did get sober. But that was very disturbing, aside from all the other emotional abuse. And when I confronted him about it afterwards, he really lacked remorse.
Hmm.
And so you really can't heal with somebody if they don't have remorse and empathy for what they put you through. And then I always say I had three last straws. The third one was he got arrested. So I was like, okay, I'm safe. He's the government's problem now. He's not going to bug me.
Yeah.
I'm out. And then I left.
Yeah. And then so you went to California
I went to
after
California
that?
about 2 years later. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah. And so, and how long did you work on your book before you published it?
I'd say it was one book in the beginning, then it turned into something else. So I would say about 3 years, 3 to 4 years,
Yeah.
but the real like chunk of it, probably 2.5 years.
Yeah. And so, and we were talking a lot about just, how our businesses align. Obviously, I do divorce, and you also have a lot of clients that are going through that.
A
Is that
lot,
right?
a lot.
Yeah. And so, how do you help clients through that process?
So what I do is, when they come to therapy, they're pretty despondent and they feel broken and because one of the things of a trauma bond is you lose your sense of self and they're confused. So the first thing I do is give them a bunch of assessments and teach them about themselves, their traits, their attachment patterns, how their developmental or early developmental experiences shape them. So, because when you're in a trauma bond, you're so focused on the other person. So I say, let's turn the mirror back on you. And so I really start to teach them about their strengths. And then we look at their weaknesses and try to build up their weaknesses so that they can get ready for this whole process that can be quite challenging that they're about to go through.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, the way that we practice, I always ask my clients, are you in therapy? Are you taking care of yourself? Because clients really want to confide in us, and I'm of course here all ears to help people and support them as much as I can because I'm a child of divorce and I've had my own trauma bonding throughout my childhood and
Right.
things I've experienced. Um, but and so we try to really treat the person and not just the case. So,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, that's beautiful.
yeah, and so I'm always like, are you taking care of yourself? Are you seeing a therapist? Because, I'm not going to charge like I can't give them emotional support like that. So
Right.
always encourage them because I don't think people understand, getting divorced is up there with death, like the most stressful things that you can have. It's
Stressful.
like moving, like the most stressful three is like moving, divorce, and death. So like
That's right.
I mean, it's really hard. I think clients going through it don't understand how really hard it is. And then I know we were talking about this before. I hate when attorneys use the legal process to hurt the other party. And
Right.
clients want to do that too, like, but they also get on the bandwagon with their attorney, like, oh yeah, I'm
Right.
going to use. it's like the attorney talks them into it. Oh yeah, I'm going to use a legal process to punish the other side. Do
Yeah,
you see
yeah,
some of
yeah.
that?
Yeah, there's post-separation abuse. And I've seen a lot of pathological people still abuse their exes through the legal process, or at least attempt to. Yeah, it's very disturbing. But that's why I always say to people, you got to get educated. Education
Yes.
really leads to empowerment through this whole process. Because
Oh yeah.
nobody, not your therapist, not your lawyer, not your priest, not your pastor, they can't save you. It really is up to you. Now, they can be a support team,
Mm-hmm.
right? Be resourced by them, but it's really up to the person who's going through the divorce.
Yeah. And I really, yeah, I love that you say that. And I love that you do the things that you do because, it's so important that they have. So, for my opinion, there's a lot of really bad therapists out there.
For sure.
Like, I mean, so I feel like, whenever we find a good one, I'm like, oh gosh, I mean, I almost always refer somebody to someone. Please, like,
Yeah,
talk to somebody. So I just really love that you said that, it's about taking care of the person. And yeah, I love that. It's,
yeah. It's a
God,
hard, it's very
yeah.
hard process, but you can do it. You can do it, but you have to find the proper helpers.
Yes, and one thing, and then what I was going to say about that too is when you're saying about educating yourself, that's one of the things that we really, really pride ourselves on doing is educating our clients about, what's going to happen. Because as you know, there's no magic in the courtroom.
No.
Because you've been a witness before, so it's like a circus tent.
Yeah, I know. Well, I always tell them this is not an emotional justice system.
No. No, it's awful. I mean, I tell clients when they're like, what do you think the judge is? So, like, this is if a client insists on litigating. What do you think the judge is going to do? I'm like, you might as well take it on black and like throw the dice. Like, I mean, even when I know the judges, like,
You
you
don't
just don't,
know.
no, you don't know what they're going to do. And then they're deciding like your whole life or your kids. Um, but there's a lot of lawyers out there that like don't even talk to clients about the mediation process or that there's
Right.
another way.
That there is
Um,
another way. Yes, yes,
yeah,
yes, yes.
like they just want them to litigate because we make more money if people litigate.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And people that come to you when they want to get divorced, they're in a very vulnerable mental state.
Exactly.
So they can easily get taken advantage of. But I tell my clients or patients all the time, I'm like, if you could stay out of court, please do. And with some
Yes.
you can't, sometimes when you're dealing with a
Yeah.
very pathological person, you can't. And then you do have to go through it. But it's definitely better if you don't.
Yeah. That's
Just
important.
get a mediator and try to
Oh
work it out.
yeah. That's a good point you bring up. So I do feel like the cases that are kind of the crazy ones are the ones that end up in court. So when you're saying pathological, so do you see a trend with these
Yeah.
personality types in litigating?
Yeah, yeah. I have on my website something called a legal abuse scale because I pulled it from a research article that really demonstrate that these people will try to abuse you through the court system. And I
Yeah,
don't, the court system is so up to speed. You know,
they're not at
they
all.
call it a high conflict divorce, but it's really not a high conflict divorce. It's usually one person still being coercively controlled through the court system. So we
Yeah.
have a long way to go with that.
Oh my gosh, such a long. Yeah, I could, God, I could get on a soapbox about that. Yeah, I really, being like my parents had a nasty kind of custody battle, but again, it wasn't necessarily. This is like almost 40 years ago because I was like a baby when they got divorced. It's like that was just the way that the world was. There weren't other
That's right.
options.
That's right. And the world is different. I mean, just the fact that we're having this conversation shows the world's different,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? And you doing what you do and me writing my book. I don't know of another book really that's been, and I'm not saying this to toot my own horn, but that's been written like this, where, women tell me, Dr. Nate, it is my survival guide, right? Because I explain to them what it is,
Mm-hmm.
how women escape, why they leave or escape, the symptoms they have, and how to heal. Because on the other side of this is healing.
Oh yeah. If they can get to that side. If they
Yeah,
ever get out of it.
if they get out of it. And that's where education is so important. And I always,
Hmm.
where I sign my book and I send it to people, I always say education leads to empowerment.
Yes, it's so true. Absolutely. Yeah, and um I know it's really interesting because when I do consults with people, I can almost always tell, some people, they've been in that type of relationship like you're describing, like 30, 25, 30
That's
years
right. Yes.
and I can tell they're not going to leave. They're just like getting information. But I can usually tell if somebody's really gonna really serious,
Gonna leave.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it takes a woman on average 4 to 7 attempts to leave a trauma bond.
Yeah. What do you think? Does it have to be does it have to be a traumatic event that usually gets them to want to leave, or what usually?
Usually what happens is they get very educated and then they start to see the person for who they really are. They see the manipulation, they see the gaslighting, they see the lies, and then they start to see it and they're like, oh, I don't want to live like this because I write about this symptom called cognitive dissonance, where the victims in a trauma bond have so much cognitive dissonance because they're dating Dirty John and Romeo. And so I always, they don't know, is he good or is he bad? Am I crazy? Is he crazy? Is the relationship good or bad? So they're always in a state of confusion. But when they get educated, that cognitive dissonance starts to dissipate and they start to see clearer and think clearer. And then if they can get to that point, they usually leave. And sometimes it is a very traumatic event that snaps them out of the
Yeah.
fog. But it can go either way. It can be a slow educational process, or like for me, I think it was both.
Yeah. Do you think that the person that is this pathological person is there a trend with them? Like, are they always a person that is like, I'm just making this up, like abused as a child or a drug addict or
Yeah,
have,
there's a bunch of contradictory research on this. So I think it's biological, psychological, environmental,
yeah. So
right?
nature
Somebody
versus
could be
nurture.
born, yeah, somebody could be born with a more dominant temperament.
Yeah.
And then, maybe they then are born in an environment that's not nurturing. And then also society, we live in a patriarchy. So
Yes.
kind of imbues men to be more entitled. And so I think it's a combination of those three. And I think it's different for every person. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
different theories about that. There's a guy who just wrote a book that says it's that they're born with it, but I've had the top researcher in the country read the second chapter of my book so that it was scholarly sound. And when I said psychopaths are born, he said, you better take that out. That's not proven. So,
Oh, I see.
see what I
Okay.
mean? So there's a
Yeah.
lot of different
Who was
conversations
that?
about it.
Who
Josh
was
G. Miller, Josh G. Miller, he
Okay.
did all the research on dark tetrad individuals.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, so I do think it's a combination, just like
Yeah.
everything. Just like everything,
So,
there's multiple causality.
oh yeah, I know.
It's
Yeah.
like A equals B, it just doesn't go like that.
I was
But
curious
I
if you
do
saw.
think the research does show a lot of it is learned, right? If somebody screams at you all day long, you're probably going to think that that's okay, and you might never want to be dominated again. So you become dominating.
Yeah. And then I want to turn this on its head a little bit. What about, can women be the pathological
Oh, of
lovers?
course, of course. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So if women are, do you have any male clients that are in that
I
situation?
don't. I don't. I've had some in the past, but I don't right now. Mostly it's just women that come to me. But of course, I mean it's
Yeah.
not about gender or sexual orientation or socioeconomic status,
I was just
anybody.
curious if you saw,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it is less. I think it's 1 in 4 women are victims of domestic violence and 1 in 9 men.
Yep. Yeah.
So
Yeah, you see it less for sure. And the reason I was asking is because I was telling you, sharing with you, I had a stepmother that was an alcoholic and abusive to my dad. And so I've seen both
seen
sides of
it.
that. So I
Yeah.
was wondering if you've seen men, well, they had a dysfunctional relationship in general, but I was wondering if you've seen, kind of,
Yeah, I have so many men reach out to me on social media and say, thank you
yeah.
so much for what you're posting. I'm going through this. And I have a few that I DM with continually and try to
Oh,
support.
yeah. Yeah. Because we have male and female clients. But I do think it is mostly the women that are, have you dealt with a narcissist? We hear that a lot. So yeah. So Dr. Nate, if we have some clients that are interested in reading your book or want to hear more about you, how can they, first of all, find your book? And then secondly, what if they want to become a client? Like we might refer some clients to, how
Yeah.
would we do that?
Yeah, so my book, Run Like Hell, A Therapist's Guide to Recognizing, Escaping, and Healing from Trauma Bond, you can get it on my website, drnae.com. The nice thing about that, you can get the audiobook, the ebook, and the hardcover, but you can get it on Amazon, you can get it Barnes& and Noble, you can get it everywhere books are sold. And go to the real Dr. Dr. Nadine to Instagram. I post every single day, as you know, and I do, currently work with patients. So you can refer them. I
Yeah.
get them, they go on a waiting list. And then I'm also launching a community for, I call them surthrivers, when, people who have surthrived, and it's
Yeah.
Dr. NAE. No, what is it? It's TBR dot Dr. NAE. So it's trauma bond recovery. But you can find
Okay.
that on my website too. And go to my website, Dr. Nay, because I have free assessments, free meditations. And so there's
Oh,
tons of
wow.
resources.
I
Yeah,
love that. Yeah. So we'll post the links to all of that stuff on when
right.
we post the podcast for everybody. So for you viewers out there that want to contact her or read her book, we'll have those links below. So
Great. Thank you
yeah.
so much.
So, thank you so much for joining us today. And I look forward to continuing to connect and
Me
getting these
too.
little tidbits from you. And it was just such an honor to have you on today.
So much for having me.